If you want to go ahead and turn to John 6, I will be reading from there. And before we get started, as I said before, this happens shortly after the feeding of the 5,000. Now, the book of John is a great book. And the reason being behind that is that whether you're young, whether you're old, the book of John kind of gets it all in there. Because sometimes if you take the Bible, you say, you're a new believer, and you're like, I want to start reading the Bible. So you open up to the very first part of it, and you say, God created the heavens and the earth, and this, that, and the other. And you start thinking, God created the heaven and the earth and the animals and the people, and then everything got messed up before the end of the first couple of chapters. You're like, okay, well, sometimes I like to read the end of the book because, I like to know how the story ends. You get, and the Lord rendered the heavens and rained down sulfur, fire, and brimstone upon the world for the judgment of the... It's like... So sometimes when you're a new believer, you open up the Bible and you say, I don't know where to start. Because I go to one end and I'm just in awe of what God is creating. I go to the other end and God is destroying what He created at the beginning. John is a good place to start. And my uncle, who passed away 2 years ago now, was told when he first came to his faith to read the book of John. And it wasn't just because his name was actually John. It's because it is a very good book. If you know someone that is just getting into the faith, someone that just asks you, I need somewhere to start. I've never read the Bible before. I don't understand it. The book of John, the Gospel of John, is a great place to start because it's written a bit like a persuasive essay. And if you've gone to college in recent years, you may know what that is. If not, a persuasive essay is an essay, it's a speech that is trying to get you on the speaker's side. They want you to believe what they're saying. They want you to think about what you're saying. So John is laying out this book, his gospel, trying to get you to believe. Particularly, John 20:30 says, Jesus performed many other signs that are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe. So, there was a lot of stuff that Jesus did. You could imagine if you want to think that Jesus taught for 3 years, that's about 1,000 days. If you took one gospel, that's probably not enough pages to fill up an entire day or an entire 1,000 days. So, Jesus also obviously did some things here and there that the disciples didn't record all of it. Like I've said before, the Sermon on the Mount, as it was called, where he taught the Beatitudes, where he taught that the law is not necessarily that you should take eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but turn the other cheek. He probably preached that sermon over and over, the same way that a lot of preachers that go on tour to multiple places preach the same message because not everybody heard it. Especially, nowadays you could say, okay, I want to know who said about what last Sunday. You could watch like 5 or 6 preachers on a Sunday. They didn't have that. So Jesus would go around everywhere and have to preach the same sermon. So obviously the disciples weren't going to write every single time he did the sermon. Then in John 21:25 he says, Jesus did other things as well, that even if they were written, the world wouldn't have enough room for the number of books that would be written. John was very, very specific about what he included. He wanted to make sure that in his gospel that he got what Jesus came for, who Jesus was, what Jesus died for, and why you should believe. He wasn't just journaling what happened. He wasn't just thinking, well, I'll just write down some of the things Jesus did. He was very, very particular about what he wrote down. So, going to start in John 6 and 25. You give me one moment. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, Rabbi, when did you get here? And Jesus answered, Verily, truly, I tell you, you were looking for me, not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and you had your fill. Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval. Then they asked him, What must we do, or what must we do to do the works of God, or the works God requires? Jesus answered, The work of God is this, to believe in the one that he has sent. So they asked him, What sign then will you give that we may see and believe it you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate manna in the wilderness. It is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat. And Jesus said to them, Very truly I tell you, it is not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, always give us this bread. Then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for allowing us to be here today. Though we are cold, though we are uncomfortable, we have come this morning to praise your name and to learn more about you, Lord. Be with everyone that is here and help us to be attentive to your word, to help us to gain things from your word, that it would not be the words that I speak, but that it would be the words that you speak through me. And for those that are not here with us this morning, Lord, whether it be sickness or whether they couldn't be here for any other reason, Lord, go out to them, give them peace, give them healing, and help us all to be reunited as a single body. For the things of this world are nothing in comparison to your glory and to your power. In Christ's name, amen. So, Jesus did a whole lot of things to prove he was God. You have every single miracle that attests that he was God in the flesh, that he was the coming Messiah, that he was the Messiah that had came. But there was something particular about this verse that makes me think that this guy was really Jesus. And what it is comes from verse 30 out of that chapter. So they asked him, What sign then will you give that we may believe you? What will you do? Every aspect of me that is a human being, and probably every aspect of you, wanted to turn around to them and say, I just did a sign for you. If you don't know what I'm talking about, the video that I showed, he was feeding 5,000 people. He took 2 fish, 5 loaves, and fed 5,000 people. These are the same people. In the beginning of this, he said, You come looking for me, not because you know who I am, because you've come to follow me, but because I fed you. These are the same people that he fed on the other side of the lake. And at the beginning of this entire chapter, it said, sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore, the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs. They saw the signs that he had performed by healing the sick. But yet, however many days later it may have been since they saw this sign, since they were fed, and now they are over here in this other city, they seem to have completely forgotten it. Well, show us a sign. The human part of me, and possibly the human part of you, would want to turn around and say, I just showed you a sign. Did you not believe that sign? But yet, we sit there, we laugh, and we think about it as like, wow, those people back then they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know who Jesus was. But we're guilty of the same thing. God, I want you to tell me, should I join this group at church? Should I become a teacher at this church? Should I be a deacon? Should I be an elder? Should I study your word more? And God says, yes. God, could you give me a sign? I just said yes to you. But yet you want a sign. And then sometimes it's like in the Old Testament, he gives you a sign, and it's like, well, give me another sign. And he gives them another sign. And they're like, one more sign. Keep going on and on asking for signs, when sometimes it's, go. Stop asking for signs and go. So, this is the thing that these people were looking for. They were looking for food. They were looking for something physical. They were looking for something to eat. What were they eating? They were eating physical food that filled their stomach. Where Jesus said to them, do not long for the things of this earth that will spoil, for the food that will not fill you, but long for the things of God that are eternal. So, when we look at this and start off at the beginning, the disciples are here with Jesus. They had gone before him. They were there when he fed the 5,000. They were there when he encountered these people, but they weren't necessarily right there with them. But there were more than just the 12 disciples, which were the original ones per se. They were the inner circle. There were other disciples, maybe hundreds, even thousands of people that followed Jesus, but they weren't part of the inner 12 that he had called especially. The disciples, who were they? By name, there were 12 of them. Simon, who was also called Peter, Andrew, James and John, Philip, Thaddeus, Bartholomew, Thomas, James, Matthew, Simon, not Simon Peter, but another one named Simon, and then Judas. Then later, once Judas would fulfill his part in history, he would be replaced by Matthias. But out of all of these 12 disciples, every single one of them, except for John, ended up paying with their life for their belief in Christ. So, obviously, these guys had to be the superstars of what was Judaism back then, and then what it became the superstars of what Christianity was going to be. They obviously had to be devout followers. They had to know their scripture back and forth. Nope. Jesus came into the world with a radical plan to basically shake the whole world up. It was to take sin that had condemned everyone to ever live to die because they were not part of God, and he planned to turn that on its head and basically say, if you believe in me, you shall not perish. If we were going to go about it, we were going to build a team to basically take the best message ever possible to the world, some people would probably start looking in, the listings for famous preachers, Billy Graham, all the great preachers that are quoted all the time. I started to say some other names, but maybe not those. But they would pick probably preachers, people that could recite the Bible backwards and forwards. They could read it in Greek, in Hebrew, in Aramaic. They could read everything. But Jesus didn't pick those people. He had the option. He could have gone to the Pharisees and okay, who's the smartest among you? I need to send a message. His dream team of people that came to do this message were a bunch of fishermen, two brothers with very heavy feet, a know-it-all with a severe case of foot and mouth disease, a tax collector, a zealot, and to crown it all off, he had somebody that was going to betray him. So, if you remember, when Jesus had passed, before he had been resurrected, the disciples were sitting in mourning and also in hiding. And one of the disciples said, I'm going fishing. And a bunch of the other disciples said, we'll go with you. These guys were fishermen. They fish. They got up in the morning, got on the boat, they went out and they fished. Sundown, they came back in from fishing. Next morning, they did the same thing. These people that he drew, some of them, all they knew was fishing. The next group that I talked about, the two brothers with heavy feet, if you know who I'm talking about, is the sons of Zebedee, who were also nicknamed the Sons of Thunder. The reason they get that nickname is because one time Jesus and the disciples were rejected from this town. And they said to Jesus, tell us to call down fire and brimstone upon this town to judge them for not letting us into this town. Not the best way to win people over. Just wiping out a town, not the best idea. They also would later have their mother come up and ask for the left and right seat of Jesus' throne be given to her sons. Possibly not known for thunder for that reason, but they were a little bit on the fireworks side of faith, per se, big flashes of light come to Jesus. The know-it-all was a foot and mouth disease. If you know what foot and mouth disease is, it's a problem between brain and foot. And it's that you have these great ideas in your head, but when you step out to go do it, you end up stepping right into your own mouth with your foot. And the disciple that I give that name to is Peter, Simon, who was called Peter. You say, well, where do you get that from? I have kind of a childish view of Peter, because Peter was always there with the right answer. He always knew exactly what he needed to say to Jesus, but every single time he said it, the next verse over in the next day, he was there sticking his foot in his mouth. Jesus asked, who do the people say that I am? And then he asked, well, who do you think I am? And Peter's just like, ooh, 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 ooh. You're the Messiah. It's like, very good. But then a little bit later down the road, Jesus would predict his own death. And then Simon Peter would jump up in front of him and say, no, 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 no. I will never let them kill you. To which Jesus turns to Simon Peter and says, get behind me, Satan. That's pretty strong words coming from the Son of God, that he would call you Satan, which, by the way, in Hebrew means adversary. So, beloved disciple goes to adversary. Get behind me, Satan, for you are concerned with things that are of man and not of things of God. I'm sure Peter went from however tall he was to about 3 foot high. Later, Peter would say, I will never forsake you, Lord. And Jesus is like, you'll do it 3 times before the cock crows. And he did it. Peter had a lot of good intentions. And then Peter had a tendency of sticking his foot in his mouth. The disciple named Matthew was also called Matthew the tax collector. This theme has gone from way back in Jesus' time to now. No one likes taxes. Probably no one likes tax collectors much either. So Jesus took someone that was well-to-do, but also on the fringe of society because no one liked him. Mainly because he was a Jew that submitted to the authority that had come in and taken over and started collecting taxes from his own people. And typically not in fair proportions. Then you have the other Simon, who was a zealot. And when you say, what's a zealot? They were fanatical. So fanatical that they were very much against any Jewish person that left the Jewish faith to adopt Roman or Greek customs. Simon would have probably liked to behead Matthew. So, you have all the group sit down for your first big group meeting when you have all 12 disciples. You got the few people over here that stink, smell like fish. They've been fishing for so long that it's probably in their skin that it doesn't come out. You've got one guy that seems to know all the answers. You've got a tax collector, which probably none of them were particularly fond of. And then you got the guy that was probably across the row from him with his sword just sitting there kind of playing with the handle, and everyone thinking, he's going to kill that one. He's going to kill him. And then ultimately, they may have not recognized who Judas was at the time, but Jesus would have looked out and saw, that's the person who's going to betray me. Probably not the best team you would ever want to put together. But the thing is, the team that he put together was not about bringing together the super disciples. It wasn't a big group of heroes of the faith. It was about people that would have no place in the world doing what they were doing, but they did because of what Jesus put in them. So, when it comes to a disciple, what does it mean to be a disciple? Well, obviously you could be a fisherman or you could be a tax collector about anything. Anybody can be a disciple. But once you are a disciple, there's kind of a little bit of a requirement behind it. And if you were here Wednesday night, I know I beat the horse a little bit dead with the whole learning about other languages, and I hate to say it, I'm going to do it again. I want to throw up 2 words in front of you. One, the first one, is mathetes. The left side, I don't know my directions apparently, the left side is what it would look like in Greek. The right side is what it sounds like. Mathetes and then manthano, which, I'm glad you asked, they mean this. Mathetes is disciple. Manthano is I learn. Particularly if you know anything about Spanish, if there's an O at the end of a word, it typically is I am doing something. I am learning, I am running. The same thing is true of Greek, except for the little letter that looks like a W is typically, it's not a W, it's an omega, but it implies I learn. And both of the words share that part at the bottom, math. Not math as in adding numbers, but just a sound in Greek. So, they both share it. I know there's an N sound that appears in the middle of Monthano, but they both come from the same root. They're both interconnected. And they're connected in the same way that a teacher is one who teaches. Teacher, teaching, teaches. In Greek, disciple has that same sort of form that you would say teaching, teacher, except it is one who learns. A disciple is somebody that learns. So, these people that Jesus encounters when he first comes across the boat are not disciples in the sense that they want to learn. They are following him for a free meal ticket. So in order to be a disciple, you have to be learning, which I know there's probably the same thought going through everybody's head. I don't want to learn. I learned for 12 years in school. I learned throughout college. This learning is not exactly the same as the learning you might think it is. We learn not necessarily more about God in a book-smart sense as though we could learn what God's first name was, or we could know what God did when he was before God, because you can't learn those things. One thing, because, well, they're not written down and he didn't tell anybody. So, what do we learn? We learn how we are supposed to live. We learn the things that are holy to God. We learn to live the way that we are intended to live. We're called into holiness. We're called to separate ourselves. And holiness isn't necessarily like this thing that once you reach a certain level, you become holy and you start to shine like an angel, or like the pictures that have the little golden rings around your head. It's not a level you get to and all of a sudden you glow. That's not what holiness is. Holiness is about being set apart. It's about doing things that make you different, doing things that make you upright towards God. We're called into a deeper relationship. We can't learn everything. No matter how old you get, no matter how smart you get, no matter how many versions of the Bible you read, how many languages you can read, you cannot learn everything that is of God. Because according to who God is, you can't contain God in your mind. The vastness and the wonderfulness of everything that God is can't be contained by the creation, by the human. No more can a paintbrush have everything that it took to make a painting can we understand what we were created by, who we were created by. I made the analogy before that you take a cup of water, you walk out to the ocean and scoop it up, you've got ocean in your hand. And you might have sand, you might have little plankton. You have things you can't see, some things you can see. But by no means is what is in that little cup of water explain everything that's out there in the sea. There are fish down so deep that they don't have eyes because they couldn't see anyways. There are things like blue whales that are absolutely massive. You can't contain those things in a little cup. So the little cup that is a human can't fully understand God. So, as we continue on in our faith, sometimes the things that we learn are not so much that we learn a great deal, but we learn more to rely on God. We learn that we don't have it, but He does. To not trust ourselves, but to trust Him. So how do we go about that? Some of it's really simple. If you have a kid, if you ever had a kid, if you ever were a kid, you go up to the stove and touch it when it's on, ow, that's hot. You learn not to do that again. Unless, you're just like, is it still hot? Yeah. We learn through experience. You touch it and it burns, you learn, don't touch it. You learn if you fall into a certain sin, if you chase after a certain sin, you realize eventually it breaks you down. You sit there with the TV on, you crack open some of the drink, you drink and drink and drink until you're drunk, and then things start piling up on you. You lose your job because you can't go into work because you can't drive straight. Heaven forbid, the worst thing that probably could happen was you get drunk, you go out, and you end up in a car wreck, killing other people, harming yourself. That's one of those things, you learn not to do it, but hopefully no one has to learn that lesson that way. Sometimes you learn following after things of lust nature, whether it's pornography or whether it's just being out there having relationships that do not please God. Most of the world today would say, there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is it starts affecting any future relationship you would have because you have a very skewed view of what a relationship is. And I could preach an entire service on that, but I won't because I'm already halfway through this one. The things we go through are not meaningless. The things we go through are the things that teach us. Yes, you can read your Bible, and I encourage everyone to read their Bible as much as possible. But don't just think that God is encapsulated into a Bible. Yes, the things that God has done are in this Bible. Yes, you can learn about God. But God is very much a real person in a real life world. Do not let the things that go on in your life be meaningless. And what I mean by that, we have a lot of younger people. We have, in our church, we have at least 4 youth, hopefully. We have more. We have children younger than the youth. And what the hope is that those that are stronger in faith, those that are, I try not to use the word older because age has nothing to do with spiritual maturity. You could be 50 years old and have no clue about the things of God, or you could be 15 to 20 and know a lot about God. It's about how close you follow. It's about chasing the things that are Him. But we have a lot of young Christians out there. And what we need is those that are strong in their faith to help those young ones. Maybe when you were young, you lost a parent at a young age. you went throughout your childhood or out throughout your early adulthood and you didn't have your mother or your father. Maybe as a woman, maybe you have lost a child. Maybe you have struggled with addiction, like I talked about, with alcohol, with drugs, with other things like that. Maybe you face pain every single day. It's not a point of waking up and taking a pill. It's just you wake up and you hurt. Do not believe for a moment that those things are insignificant, are without a purpose. Everything that is and was can be made to glorify God. You may find a young believer, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a child, it doesn't necessarily have to be a youth. It could be someone your same age. It could be someone that is my age, a little bit younger, a little bit older. They could be any age. But you find these people that are young believers that the moment they start believing, their world crashes down on top of them. And that sometimes people take the very things that are torturing them and use them to make them doubt God. Well, your mom died when you were a young kid. Did God love you back then? Was God really being loving when he took your mom away? Well, what about the child that you lost? If God is a loving God, why would he take away a child like that? He didn't even give a chance. If God is supposed to love all these little children, why did he take yours away? Don't worry about the drugs. Don't worry about the alcohol. It's fine. Everyone does those things. Pornography is not a sin. It's something that everybody does. All these things make people teeter. It even makes those that are faithful teeter on the edge of disbelief. And sometimes not even disbelief, but on the edge of giving up. Because they are attacked by these things, by a pressure from the outside world that is continually more and more pushing, saying, God is not dead, God never was there in the first place. They say, this suffering, all this pain, God is obviously not there. They say all these things to push believers away from their faith. They do it to push those that might believe. They do it to push those that ever may think about believing, and to get them as far away from it as possible. Do not take for granted the things that you have gone through in your life that you think were painful, that you think were a dark time, that you may have thought were punishment, that you may have thought were things that happened because God was not there, because everything can be made to his glory. You, in an experience you have, may have the chance to be a light to someone that no one else can be, because you share something with them that they see in no one else. Knowledge isn't just science, it isn't just math, it's not what we learn in school. Knowledge is about learning who God is, about learning what God is. It's about taking you from the point where you say, I don't see where God is, I think God has forgotten about me, to the point where you say, I cannot find a place where God isn't. We need to have strong believers. We need to have smart believers. Believe it or not, faith and intelligence are not mutually exclusive. And what that means is sometimes we define things as you must be this and you cannot be this. You cannot be at peace when you are at war. They are mutually exclusive. One cannot happen with the other. Many people will tell you, you cannot be faithful, you cannot be religious, and also be intelligent. Because they say that religion is backwards from what societal thought should be, to what intelligent thought would be. The biggest thing they like to say nowadays is the religious people, particularly those from the South, are ignorant and bigoted. And the opposite, I think, is more so true. But schools, the internet, TV, everyone wants to lie to us, and they want to lie to both the young believer and to the child. And it is a lie of omission. And what that means is they lie by leaving something out. People are taught that this is the truth. That anything that is not this is false and is a lie. We, as well as children, are all being taught that this is this. There is no thinking to it. This is truth. That life does not exist before a child is born. And even then, if we decide it's not, it's still not a child. That is the truth that we are being told. We're being told that our religion isn't compatible with normal lifestyle, that it is backwards, and it's ignorant and bigoted. We're being told that we are racist, that we are homophobic, that we are sexist, that we are all sorts of things, and that that is the truth, and that we can't argue that. And every single day, our kids included, are going through schools, and they don't come out and say it right to you, but they teach it because they don't teach people how to think. Believe it or not, you can have faith in God and you can think. And what happens is, you start believing what they tell you because you don't know how to think. I start to say this, and as I think about when I wrote it last night, I'm like, I don't know if I can actually say this publicly, but I think that's the entire thing I think that's the point, is that it's not easy. But as I look around the congregation, and I look around the church, not just this church, but any church that I've ever been in, I see those 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. I see those that are young children in school. I see people that are high schoolers. But there is a distinct lack of my age. From the age of 18 till now, the time I'm 30, there's not that many of my age in church. And some of them I knew. I knew quite a few people that were very strong in their faith, and I know quite a few of those people that after they got past a certain point, they grew out of what the church was. They decided, it was fun when we were growing up, but it's just not for me. I don't stand up here because my parents were Christian. I was raised in a Christian home. I have a father and a mother that are very faithful. But that's not why I'm up here. And I'm not up here because the two of them raised me to be Christian. I'm standing up here because I choose. Because where 1,000 times the world around me has said, you're stupid, you're bigoted, you're better than that. I stand, and for every 1,000 times that they have said that to me, 1,001 times I say no. I chose to believe, and I mourn quite often because they aren't just faces in a crowd. Sometimes when you stand in front of a church, you look out and you see faces. Sometimes you see young ones, sometimes you see old ones, but they're not just faces. I chose to believe as opposed to getting rid of it. I suppose nowadays it would probably be a lot easier just to give up faith, especially when we went through a time there a few months back where every Sunday was another shooting in a church. But I choose that His glory, that the God of heaven deserves far much more than I can give. I choose to believe because despite everything that I've seen, every one of my peers, those that I would wish would be in the ministry alongside of me, those that would just be in the church, despite every one of them leaving, I look out day in and day out, and I look all around me. Look at the sky and the stars. I don't question if God exists. The only thing I can question is how can He not? So, our experiences, not only do they change us, they change us around. Those of us that are of the faith and those that may come to the faith. We take what we have, we pour it into others. And it is something I wish that I could do better for my generation, for those that are a few years younger, a few years older than me. But we all need to be strong. We all need to have our faith not as a crutch, but as a staff that we stand by. 12 disciples. They weren't unique. As I said before, they were a bunch of fishermen, a bunch of guys that sometimes had their feet in front of them, but their brain was a few steps behind. But the world shook from what Jesus did, not because of who the disciples were, but because they believed in him and they followed him. That the experiences they had changed them so radically that they gave their lives to keep telling people that message. We need to chase God in that same way. We should chase Jesus as the disciples did. We need to chase God as though we were men starving for food. We need to chase like those who are thirsty in the desert. Our pursuit is not a casual thing we do on Sundays, that we go to hear a good thing, that we go to get our spirits lifted, but we go and we chase God. We chase who Jesus was. We chase them as though we can't live without him. Because our very lives depend on him. Salvation was not just a little offer, a little extension, if you're not doing anything else, come get saved. It was the way out. It was, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the light. No one comes to the Father. And that every word that proceeds from the Father's mouth should be bread and water to us. That we cannot live by things that spoil, by things that will perish in this world, but that we must live by everything that proceeds from his mouth.